Chapter 17. The theory had begun as a pattern they recognized, technical, almost abstract, but once Malik decided they would not act on instinct alone, it became an investigation. For nearly 2 weeks, the warehouse turned into an investigation bureau. Maps were replaced by structured reports, screens displayed travel records, financial movement charts, telecommunications logs that had been legally obtained through contacts Malik had cultivated over years of careful relationship building. Nothing was rushed. Malik knew they needed precise information for this. He insisted on confirmation, not assumption. "If we are wrong," he had said on the first night, standing before the whiteboard covered in names and timelines, "we do not destroy what little stability remains in your life. So we prove it or we walk away." Alexander had nodded, though walking away had never felt like a real option. Malik began with institutions he knew would always act in his favor. He contacted his former colleagues in security analysis departments, a few retired liaison officers who still had access to non-public transportation databases, a compliance officer in an international banking network who owed Malik a debt from a mission years ago. None of them were told the full story. Each was given a fragment. Malik's strength was not hacking, it was orchestration. He understood bureaucracies the way Alexander understood code. He knew which doors could be knocked on and which could only be approached through someone else's knock. Meanwhile, Alexander worked in parallel, filtering open-source data, correlating timestamps with the subtle network disturbances he had logged weeks before. Through carefully constructed backend scripts, he observed communication spikes routed through intermediary servers in Central Asia. No illegal intrusions, pattern analysis of publicly available metadata, assembled into something meaningful. One evening, Malik entered the warehouse carrying a thin folder rather than his usual tablet. His expression was somewhat confusing, but he controlled it. "We have something," he said. Alexander stood. Malik spread the documents across the metal table. They were copies of flight records, private travel manifests. Layla's cousin had flown to Almaty 3 days before Max's disappearance. He was here in San Francisco before. 2 days later, Layla and Max were listed as passengers on a flight routed through Istanbul, with final clearance granted in Kazakhstan under a special entry category rarely used. Outside diplomatic or institutional programs. Alexander stared at the dates. Malik pointed instead to another page. "This clearance code," he said quietly, "is linked to a logistics entity that operates under infrastructure consulting. On paper. And in reality?" Alexander asked, though he already sensed the answer. "In reality, it is affiliated with a multinational strategic research consortium. One that has defense contracts in Russia, technology partnerships in China, and cybersecurity collaborations with Pakistani agencies." The words settled in slowly. Malik continued, "We traced a series of transfers into accounts associated with Layla's cousin. The timing corresponds with your custody dispute escalation and the initial pressure you experienced regarding Lumir." Alexander felt something fracture inside him. Malik stood beside the table, one hand resting on the open dossier, and spoke with the calm clarity of someone who had already arranged every piece in his mind. "Look at the sequence," he said, not emotionally but analytically. Max was moved under coordinated international clearance tied to entities connected to strategic technology acquisition. He tapped the timeline lightly. This was never random. They could not access Lumir directly without triggering legal and diplomatic complications, but they knew you, they understood your priorities. So they removed the one variable that would override your caution. His voice lowered slightly. Max was not taken because of Layla alone. He was taken because he is leverage, and once he was in controlled territory, the pressure around Lumir increased. The child first, the system second. It is a sequence designed to break resistance without ever appearing like open aggression. The logic was cold, almost clinical, and that was exactly why it hurt. "So she was paid." "We do not know if she was paid," Malik corrected carefully, "but her family received funding tied to entities that have shown interest in your system." Alexander pressed his hands against the table. Why? He asked, voice breaking slightly despite himself. Why would she do this? She doesn't care about power, she hates politics. She always said she wanted stability. Malik studied him with a gaze that held neither judgment nor pity. People do not always act for power, he said. Sometimes they act under influence, pressure, persuasion. You're saying they convinced her this was necessary. I am saying, Malik replied, that if intelligence-linked entities approached her family and framed Lumiere as a global asset being irresponsibly withheld, they could have presented this as a strategic intervention. They could have told her she was safeguarding her son's future or preventing instability. Alexandra's chest tightened painfully. She wouldn't, he whispered. She wouldn't use him like that. Malik did not soften his tone. She already has. Silence filled the warehouse, heavy and unrelenting. For days afterwards, more confirmations arrived. It was no coincidence. Malik compiled everything into a structured dossier. When he finally laid it before Alexander in full, he did not dramatize it, so we were actually right about all of this. The words felt like both validation and devastation. Alexander sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. She looked at me, he murmured. The night before she took him, she told me she was worried about Max. She told me I was becoming obsessive. His voice trembled now. Was I? He asked suddenly, looking up at Malik. Did I push her into this? Did my work scare her so much that she thought this was necessary? Malik shook his head slowly. This was coordinated, he said firmly. This required external facilitation. This was not a spontaneous maternal decision. This was arranged. Alexandra's eyes burned. She's his mother, he said. How could she allow him to be placed into something like this? Malik's voice lowered slightly. If she believes she is acting in alignment with powerful institutions, she may not see it as danger. She may see it as advancement. The idea hollowed him out. There was something unsettlingly brilliant about the way Malik assembled truth. He did not rely on instinct alone, nor did he rush to dramatic conclusions. He understood institutions the way a surgeon understands anatomy, where influence flows, where it hides, where it constricts. Years of working with and navigating intelligence networks, political corridors, and power struggles had sharpened him into someone who saw beyond surface narratives. While others might have been consumed by anger or grief, Malik separated emotion from logic and rebuilt the story from fragments no one else would have thought to connect. Alexander watched him that night with a mixture of gratitude and awe, realizing that this was not luck guiding them forward, it was experience. So what now? Alexander asked, though he knew. Malik closed the folder. Now, he said, we proceed as planned. They stood alone in the warehouse after the team had left, the dossier still open between them. Kazakhstan, Malik said again, not as theory now, but as destination. You're certain they've hidden him? Alexander said quietly. Yes, Malik replied. If this were purely about relocation, he would appear in public records by now. School enrollment, residency updates, or anything that suggests his movement in public spaces. There is nothing. Alexandra's jaw tightened. That house, he said. You think that's where he is? I think it was a transition point, Malik answered. They may have moved him since, but the communications patterns cluster there. Alexander stared at the map as if willing it to reveal more. They won't keep him visible, Malik continued. If Lumiere is leverage, your son is insurance. The words landed hard. So we go, Alexander said. We verify, Malik nodded. We confirm his location, we assess the level of control, and then we determine the window. And if there is no window, Alexander asked. Malik's gaze hardened slightly. Then we create one. Malik did not treat the false identities as theatrical disguises. We are not hiding from airport officers, he explained while reviewing the documents spread across the table. We are insulating ourselves from attribution. The names they would travel under were not random inventions but fully built legends, complete professional histories, tax records, consultancy portfolios, and digital footprints that stretched back several years. Their cover was deliberately ordinary. Midlevel logistics consultants contracted to evaluate cross-border freight efficiency and infrastructure optimization. It was dull, bureaucratic, and entirely plausible in Kazakhstan's development-heavy climate. The passports were legally issued through layered citizenship, channels Malik had access to through old contacts, not forged paper that would collapse under scrutiny. Their employment emails existed. Their consulting firm had a modest but traceable website. If anyone checks, Malik said calmly, they find consistency, and consistency discourages deeper digging. If something went wrong, if they were seen near a restricted property, if surveillance caught them conducting inquiries, if someone later accused them of interference, the names attached to those actions would not lead directly back to Alexander Varen or Malik Diop. More importantly, Malik understood the political trap involved. The opposing side had already operated in legal gray zones, under questionable authority, hidden funding streams, hidden international facilitation. If those actors attempted to formally accuse Alexander of wrongdoing, they would risk exposing their own involvement in manipulating custody and leveraging a child for strategic gain. They won't go to open court, Malik said bluntly. Because to accuse you, they would have to explain when and how that happened, which involves a whole inquiry on that. That meant the battlefield was contained. Their adversaries were not uniformed police or public prosecutors. It was the network itself, those who had orchestrated Max's removal. By traveling under constructed identities, Alexander and Malik reduced traceability while also signaling that this confrontation would not unfold inside predictable legal frameworks. It would remain in the shadows where it had begun, where neither side could easily appeal to formal justice without incriminating themselves. The weight of what they were choosing pressed down on them both. There will be consequences, Malik added, political, legal, personal. Alexander looked up, eyes no longer clouded but sharpened by something steadier. They've already created consequences, he said. Malik studied him for a long moment. Then we prepare for departure. As the plane descended into Kazakhstan, Alexander felt the weight settle in his chest. This was no longer a plan, this was where Max had been brought just months ago. Somewhere beyond the runway and the low stretch of buildings was the place his son had stepped into a new, controlled life without him. The realization tightened his throat. He wasn't landing as a consultant under a fabricated name, he was landing as a father walking onto contested ground. And the closer the wheels came to touching earth, the harder it became to ignore the truth. He was here to bring his son back. They entered Kazakhstan under carefully constructed identities. The airport felt deceptively ordinary, but every checkpoint felt like a test. Alexander maintained the composure he had trained for. His breathing remained steady, his gaze neutral. Beside him, Malik exuded calm authority, answering routine questions with measured confidence. The air was colder than Alexander expected. The city skyline shimmered under a pale sun, modern towers rising from flat expanses of winter-dulled earth. Malik's team had already secured a safe residence, an unremarkable apartment in a mixed-use district where foreign consultants were common enough to avoid attention. Vehicles were arranged and communication lines established. Once inside, operations began immediately. Malik's team dispersed into assigned roles: transportation monitoring, property registry checks, telecommunications pattern analysis. Start with the immediate area, Malik instructed calmly. Cross-reference movement spikes within a 20-kilometer radius. Alexander joined the digital tracking effort, feeding in the metadata clusters he had prepared before departure. Hours passed just like that. The house that was on their radar showed no current occupancy anomalies, no movement spikes matching the previous pattern. Expand radius, Malik said after a while. They did still nothing. Alexander felt the first stirrings of dread. Check transit hubs, he suggested. The team complied, however it was empty. One analyst looked up slowly. There's no trace, she said. Alexandra's throat tightened. That's impossible, he murmured. He was here. Malik remained composed. Or he was moved, he said. The realization landed like a physical blow. Alexander stepped away from the screens, pressing his hands against the edge of the table. Maybe we were too late, he whispered. Malik approached him carefully, or they anticipated it and relocated him preemptively. They've either tried to mislead us, he said, or they anticipated that we would come. he turned to Alexander. If they moved him before we arrived, it means they planned several steps ahead. If they didn't, it means they're waiting to see what we do. Neither option was comforting. He let that settle before continuing. We operate as if they might already know we're here, even if they don't. Our next move happens within 24 hours. The longer we wait, the more time they have to adjust. The apartment felt suddenly smaller. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, forcing his breathing to steady. Where? He asked. Malik looked at the expanding digital map. That, he said quietly, is what we find next. Somewhere within that vast expanse or beyond it, Max existed, hidden within a network that believed itself untouchable. Inside the apartment, tension thickened into resolve. They had everything, all information, all sources, but it didn't prove to be reliable after all. The deeper they stepped into the maze, the clearer it became that someone on the other side had begun anticipating their moves. The hunt had not ended, it had just begun.